Well, there's a war happening in Sudan between the ruling military and a powerful paramilitary group with thousands of civilians caught in between. Now, some are saying this reeks of another CIA-backed coup after the Sudan military concluded an agreement with Russia to build a Navy base in the country on the Red Sea. Now, the Russian base is contingent on Sudan forming a civilian government and legislature, which would need to give the final approval of the base. Now, the two groups, the ruling military and the powerful paramilitary force, worked together to oust the previous leadership in 2021 and were working on drafting a power-sharing deal where the paramilitary force would be folded into the ruling military somehow. But that agreement went south and fighting broke out. That's the official story making the news. Meanwhile, it's dire for civilians on the ground. According to the Washington Post, the official death toll from the Ministry of Health after 6 days of fighting is at 331, with 3,180 wounded. But the true numbers are certainly many times higher. Doctors have been killed, children have bled to death trying to reach help, and armed men are invading private homes to rob, rape, and kill. Markets and medical facilities have been looted in the fighting. 39 out of 59 hospitals across the country have been shut down because of the fighting. People haven't had food to eat for days. Power is out. Cell phones are dead, so people can't call for help or check on family members. Humanitarian groups are unable to get to the people. Diplomats and aid workers have been killed. It's bad. It's really bad. And at this point, calls for any ceasefire or any sort of peace agreement have been rejected by both sides. A U.S. diplomatic convoy was fired upon, and there's talk that the U.S. is preparing troops in Djibouti to possibly evacuate the embassy. Here to give us some background into the CIA's involvement in Sudan is Larry Johnson. Larry is a veteran of the CIA and the State Department's Office of Counterterrorism. Larry provided training to the U.S. military special operations community for 24 years. He's been vilified by both the left and the right, which means he must be doing something right. So, Larry, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kim.
So there's suspicion that this infighting that's going on in Sudan reeks of CIA involvement. Maybe you could kind of give us some background information on the CIA's involvement in Sudan, the history in Sudan. I'm hearing chatter going both ways. I hear some saying it's CIA, others saying it's not, that this has been going on for a while in Sudan, that this has nothing to do with the United States or Russia. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I think that's nonsense as far as having nothing to do with the U.S. and Russia. Just the timing of the event following the announcement by the Sudanese government that they were going to allow Russia to create a port on the Red Sea. Uh, the CIA has been very active in Sudan. One of the first times I became really aware of it was in 1993 when the French terrorist, the Venezuelan terrorist, Carlos the Jackal, as he was known. He was sought by the French because he had killed some French citizens and French officers. Well, the CIA picked him up in Sudan in the summer of 1993, turned him over to the French. The CIA chief of station at the time was a man by the name of Cofer Black. You may have heard of Cofer Black because he serves on the board of Burisma with Hunter Biden. Just a coincidence. So the fact that the CIA has had a long-standing relationship with elements in this in Sudan, not just the government, but this Rapid Security Force, the RSF that's there, comes out of a militia, the Janjaweed militia, and I am positive that the CIA has had relationships with them over time. So it is highly probable that the United States has its hands again in creating chaos and helping stir it up. Let me put it this way. The United States is not doing anything to try to calm the situation. I think it's just the opposite.
What are the things the U.S. could do to calm the situation versus what they're doing now?
Well, one, withdraw the CIA support and the support for weapons going to the RSF, and threaten sanctions on all personnel involved with RSF. They could do that, but have not. So that would be the first step forward. Could collaborate with other governments like, say, Russia, to say, look, we need to bring peace to this area, as well as China. But the Chinese and the Russians aren't talking to us anymore because of the actions of Joe Biden. So the other thing to take note, the embassy is pretty large. You have almost as many U.S. personnel at that embassy as you do at the U.S. embassy in Kiev. Think about that. It is, you have large presence of U.S. diplomats, and a lot of them will be under CIA cover, obviously, where the U.S. has decided to place its interests. So it's not, most embassies in Africa are not that large at all, maybe 20 people, 15 people. But no, in Sudan, we got 70. And that, again, is not a coincidence.
What is the interest in Sudan for the U.S. government? And why has there been interest all of these years?
Well, it's changed over time. It was seen as an sort of important platform with respect to being able to conduct operations in the Middle East, in Africa, and particularly with seen as a road in to deal with Iran. Remember, Osama bin Laden, before he became notorious or infamous, was hiding out for in the 1990s in Sudan. So, and while he was in Sudan, there was actually meetings with a fellow connected to by the name of Mugniya, who was a terrorist responsible for blowing up the U.S. embassy and the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. So Mugniya was meeting with Osama bin Laden in I think it was 1995, 1996 in Sudan. So from that was that was one of the interests, but the interests have changed over time. The Sudan has been racked by civil war. So yes, the people that were telling you that, oh yeah, this has been ongoing, there have been conflict, but the United States has never really weighed in to try to do what it could to minimize that conflict. And one of the ways you do that is by cutting off arms to these independent groups and threatening sanctions on those individuals associated with those groups.
We seem to have a lot of interest in that region in general. One of the Egypt, which is right above Sudan, we give a ton of money to annually for defense. They're second to Israel. Well, now Ukraine, of course, but previously when it was Israel, that was the number one country that we were giving funds to. Egypt was number two on that list. You've got, of course, Djibouti. There's bases there. Even China has a base there. Somalia, Americans were killed in Somalia. We didn't even know we had troops in Somalia. All along that Gulf of Aden, Red Sea, it seems, is a region that we're trying to protect. We're trying to protect that waterway in order to maybe allow for shipping to go through. I
Sure.
don't know. Is that potentially why we're so interested in all the nations along the Red Sea? Is because we're really just trying to
Well,
protect shipping interests?
no, 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 no. This is so one of the most active CIA programs over in recent years has been helping support, fund, train, uh, covertly, obviously, the war to facilitate the war in Yemen. Remember, the war in Yemen has been ongoing, and it started with us as well, encouraging the Saudis to step up attacks. Now
Right.
that policy is in the process of crumbling, falling apart. Sudan would have been an ideal location for providing logistics support to the rebel troops that were fighting in Yemen. So what we've seen in the aftermath of the Putin-Xi Jinping summit in Moscow is that China has taken a very active role in reconciling Iran and Saudi Arabia. In response to that, Iran and Saudi Arabia basically are pulling the plug on the war in Yemen. The
Yeah.
Saudis were initially involved, encouraged by the United States to get involved as a way to weaken Iran. Similarly, in Syria, we're seeing the Saudis stepping up and completely reversing course on pre-policy. Remember, it was the United States and the United Kingdom that tried to initiate the coup to overthrow Bashar Assad in Syria. And that was, we had Benghazi, which was a weapons shipment point for weapons that were being sent to rebel insurgents, many of whom were Islamic extremists fighting against Bashar al-Assad. That was in part by Saudi and the other Gulf Arabs. Well, now that's ending. Just 2 days ago, the Saudi foreign minister Damascus meeting with Bashar al-Assad. So what you're seeing is a complete unraveling of the U.S. policy foundation, which had been in existence for 60 years there in the Middle East. And that certainly has military and intelligence officials alarmed. So this is this is, I think, one sort of desperate act to try to turn the course in Sudan, because the government is moving more towards the Chinese camp than the U.S. camp.
Yeah, interesting. And there's also been a lot of fighting in Eritrea and Ethiopia. There's been wars between those two
Yes.
countries, again, right there on the Red Sea. So we're just kind of naming all the nations that happen to be right there. Is the U.S. involved, do you think, in the conflict between those two nations?
Yes. Yes. No, I mean, the reality, the unfortunate reality, is since the mid 1990s, the United States has escalated what I call its expeditionary military activities overseas. Oftentimes, these have been falsely sold to the American public as efforts to promote democracy or protect democracy or protect human rights, but had nothing of the sort. The United States is trying to maintain its control over that territory in order to, one of the top priorities has been to provide some insurance and security for Israel. Uh, that has now backfired dramatically with this 180-degree turn by the Saudis. And Turkey is in the process of making a similar turn. And so you see Russia working with Turkey to provide a reconciliation between Turkey and Syria. So the U.S. is actually in the process of becoming quite isolated in the Middle East, an area that we really used to sort of rule.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I agree that it's probably no coincidence that as soon as Russia says that as soon as they've made a deal with Sudan, putting a base there on the Red Sea, that, suddenly all hell breaks loose in the nation. That seems to be
Yeah,
sort of I've noticed this trend also when tracking even the Belt and Road Initiative, anywhere where China makes a deal, any of the ports where they start making deals and areas where they start making deals, sudden chaos seems to break out in those regions,
right.
or something like a sudden explosion of a port. Oh, suddenly this port blew up, or suddenly there's ISIS that shows up in these areas around where
Right.
China is kind of looking to expand. So it does seem like we just continue to meddle in an effort to halt the expansion of China and Russia. In China economically, Russia militarily, it seems that there's definitely,
Well,
meanwhile, we have 800 bases all around the world.
yeah, actually, Russia hasn't been a military adventure like the United States.
Right.
If you look at it, in the last, since the fall of the Soviet in 1991, the only countries that Russia has been involved with militarily have been Georgia after its soldiers were attacked, and in Ukraine after 8 years of the U.S. and NATO conducting military exercises and pushing NATO further to the east. Uh, Involvement in Syria came at the specific request of the Syrian government. In contrast, the United States is sending military force instead of economic intervention, intervention in literally dozens of countries around the world. Iraq twice, Afghanistan for starters, Syria, Yemen, Somalia. Then you go up into the former Yugoslavia. There's sort of the cynical part of me thinks that all of this is trying to lay a predicate to justify an expanded defense budget, because it's doing nothing to bring peace to these regions and to preserve life. It's been just the opposite. We in fact have become something of a merchant of death, unfortunately, and I think it's a real tarnishing of the U.S. legacy.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely is. Larry, unfortunately, we're getting a little bit of a bad connection from you, so we have to cut the interview short. I wanted to ask you about your opinion on the Pentagon leaker being the 21-year-old serviceman. You definitely are skeptical of that, but we are not able to do that today because your feed is breaking up a bit, but we hope to bring you back to get more of your perspective on other topics that I know you've got a lot of opinions on.
Sure.
And people have been able to actually read about many of your opinions and your analysis on things at your website, sonar21.com. So definitely we'll be checking that out. Larry, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kim.
Well, your retirement plan may be in jeopardy due to the dollar losing its place as the global world currency, but you can hedge this by diversifying into gold and other precious metals through Birch Gold Group. As the U.S. continues to isolate and bully nations around the globe, more and more are questioning their reliance on the dollar. And it isn't just Russia and China. Even Brazil's current president was questioning why countries have to use the United States currency to trade rather than their own. In fact, they just made a deal with China to trade in their own currency. So the shift is already happening. Now, this could lead to record inflation in the U.S., which means your retirement fund could be worth less. Gold is a very stable currency, which is why it is growing in popularity. So to find out more, visit birchgold.com/Kim to get your free info kit and to start diversifying into gold and other precious metals.